So what did I think about Leigh Bardugo's Hellbent? Overall, I would say Hellbent is probably like a 3 to 4 star read. It is both better and worse than Ninth House. I think Leigh Bardugo was really smart in how she structured the book. Ninth House tells the story back and forth in time, jumping from like this past spring to the current fall or wherever we are in the story. Hellbent does the same thing. I'm only kind of like, on using a story told out of time to maintain mystery. It kind of says to me the story as a whole couldn't have functioned if you had told it linearly, and I don't know that that's a good story. Ninth House does it better because it's working with a whole year's worth of time, and Hellbent happens in the course of a couple of months. So there's a lot less mystery and tension, but there's also a lot less potential confusion on the reader's part, where like sometimes in Ninth House I was genuinely confused about where we were in time. I appreciate that Hellbent was told in this non-linear way because it kind of better connects Ninth House and Hellbent as like a unified series. Hellbent is missing its dual narrative, and while I love Alex Stern, I think she's awesome and I'm rooting for her the whole time. Even I start to get a little bit of fatigue hearing things only from her perspective. I do think we could have broken this up and continued to give dual perspective either by using Dawes or by using the detective. Whoever we chose could have actually helped weave some parts of the Hellbent story that don't work so well together a little bit more tightly. But I didn't miss Darlington. You guys know I don't really like Darlington. I find his perspective to be really off-putting and like to make him actively less likable as a character. In this case where Darlington is a demon, I think not having his perspective for most of the book helps like add to this air of mystery and this potential that the thing we're looking at isn't actually Darlington. Both Ninth House and Hellbent have like this noir, pulpy kind of vibe. Ninth House especially reminds me a lot of the Dresden Files, and like the Dresden Files, Ninth House is super problematic. Hellbent also has some troubling aspects to it, and I think anything with like this extreme black and white overexposure kind of light are going to end with some problematic elements. It's like the nature of a noir pulp kind of feel in a story. I was missing some of like the mystery detective element in Hellbent that I enjoyed so much in Ninth House. They try to incorporate it a little bit with like some faculty murders, but I just don't think it works because like I don't care about the faculty at all. It doesn't help that Alex herself is like, ain't nobody got time for this right now. So it just felt like this piece that we didn't need in the book and probably could have ignored entirely and wouldn't have changed anything. Hellbent also had me missing the secret societies a lot. This contrast of like these rich elite people who are actually the ones running the society versus like these like naive, innocent, but overly entitled like rich young kids who are actually doing the magic. You can kind of sort of like some of the kids in these societies or like not want them to be hurt. And of course, there's kids in the fraternities who are shitty too, right? Like they're a whole separate problematic trope happening. But the thing is we don't deal with any of those kids or those rituals in Hellbent. And I found myself also missing that element from Ninth House because I liked that dark academia thing. So now that we're done with the first impressions, let's jump into some old and new characters. In my Ninth House recap, I wanted more bridegroom. Unfortunately, there is no bridegroom in Hellbent. I liked the dynamic between Alex and the bridegroom, and I could see so many places where the bridegroom would have been helpful here. He could have like helped Alex keep some grays away from her and drawn other grays into her as she needed them. He could have gotten us information about the dead faculty members, or he could have gotten us information about hell. If the bridegroom had come back, we could have skipped some of the gauntlet and assembling the team elements we needed to actually go to hell. And I would have liked that because it was a lot of unnecessary build. Our extended time with Dawes in this book left me kind of confused. I felt like we had something there, and this book made me realize that maybe we didn't, and maybe Dawes is just a character of convenience and there's nothing more to her. I think this could have been alleviated if we had gotten a couple chapters from Dawes' perspective. This would have helped us to understand like how much of certain rituals or endeavors Dawes understood going on, and maybe Dawes is just like recovering from what happened in the last Ninth House, but even that could have been like refreshing, someone who is dealing with being a murderer, even if it was in self-defense. I also found the interactions between the detective and Alex to be kind of confusing. I felt like at the end of Ninth House, they had like a real bond and connection and mutual respect for each other. I know that Alex being involved in Dean Sanlow's and Bellbaum's death slash murder probably made him feel some kind of way about her. But he also is not a dumb guy. He knows that she has been almost murdered at least twice in this past school year. So I don't feel like her figuring out who had done those things would result in healthy things for Alex. As far as storytelling goes, I think the detective is the other person we could have gotten dual narration from instead of Darlington. And I would have liked to get this narration from him because he could have been more invested in the professor's murders, figuring out who did this and why, and like his dogged determination that it was somehow these secret societies. That like insight could have helped us a lot. I both liked and disliked Alex getting her roommate involved. At least this is some kind of follow-up action from like the major assault that she faced in book one and seemed to recover from the next day. But I just didn't feel like it was handled very well. I did like the way Trip was incorporated. He felt kind of like interesting and compelling. I wasn't sure how I felt about him when we originally saw him return. I was like, oh, that guy. But then we get some more information about his backstory and some more interesting things happen to him. And I end up thinking that his use was really smart. A fresh little addition to the team. Michelle ends up coming out looking like the new Bell Bomb, and I had several issues with her as a character. She's got like this semi-sympathetic backstory as like a kid that needed the Lethe scholarship to go to Yale, and she had to hide her attempt to end her life so that she could get that scholarship and be the Dante of that time. So you kind of feel for her as far as like down on her luck kid who struggled with depression and self-harm. But like, I didn't like the messaging around Michelle. Spoiler alert here, but she ends up working for a vampire slash demon, and she does this because she's so afraid of death that he's able to falsely promise her immortality. I didn't like that it took Lethe's stance that if you struggle with depression or mental illness or self-harm, you can't work in Lethe, and like reinforced it. Because to me, like the idea that if you have like a mental illness of a certain kind, or if you struggle with depression or self-harm, you can't do certain things because you can never come back from it, or you can never find good coping techniques or good support systems. That's a stereotype that's just not true. And I found the perpetuation of that stereotype in this story to be pretty damaging and also really random and one-offy and not at all necessary. Like if someone else had been the demon slash vampires familiar, even if it was like not anyone we knew, it was really no big deal at all. So I just don't understand why they did that. I have no feelings on the ex-Dante dude who was in charge of Lethe over the summer. He kind of existed. The twist about him also really didn't care about. The new Dean Sandlow being a misogynist, but otherwise not that bad a guy, I kind of had like mixed feelings about. It's very accurate in my experience to how some kinds of misogyny work. And in that way, it was sort of like satisfying. But it's also just beyond the pale and awful. He reminded me of the saying that a broken clock is right twice a day, because he does say a couple of salient points or give Alex some information that proves to be true. And the other thing I liked about him as a character is because he was so dismissive of both her and Dawes. They were able to do so much more. In some ways, he is better in the short term, at least, than like a Dean Sandlow kind of guy is. Neither one of them is ideal. There's like option three. It doesn't have to be either of those two guys. But it was like an interesting contrast in that way, especially since I had recently reread Ninth House to prep for Hellbent, comparing the damage these two different people did and their general appearance as like one guy being kind of like liberal and progressive and the other guy being like conservative and harkening back. It was interesting, really, to look and see who in the end was like the worst guy. I should mention it's not because the misogynist is a better guy or has necessarily better goals. It's just because Alex and Dawes are able to move around him in a way they would have never been able to maneuver around Dean Sandlow. So let's talk about going to hell. By far and away, my favorite part of this is the first descent into hell. I love that Yale is like literally the hellmouth. I like that it's in the library of all places. I love the scene where they descend into hell and they get to see about each other's murders. That part was great. I loved getting the different character perspectives. I loved the different kinds of murder they had faced. I really felt like that helped fit in who they were and how they were maneuvering in the world. Except for Dawes. Dawes was just confusing. Tripp's situation and the detective situation, of course, Alex, who we already knew, all of that was great. And I like how in Alex's situation, we got a little bit more from Helly's side in this particular retelling, because we've already heard about how Alex murdered all these guys in the last book. So we needed a new angle. I do think the actual like walking around the corner of the library and going to the fountain was like ridiculously simple. And the subplot about Leafy's involvement in the gauntlet and what that meant, also kind of dumb, and I could have done without. Like, as far as I'm concerned, witnessing the murders from each of those characters' perspectives and then their first experience in hell, where everything was new and unknown, the best part of this novel. It was so amazing, and I loved every part of that. Just when I thought it couldn't get any better, we return from hell, unsuccessful, and Helly is there. And that moment where Alex sees Helly and she confirms that her roommate can see Helly, so this is like a physical manifestation and not a ghost. Oh, that was so good. Perfect. The only thing that's sad about these parts of the novel that are the best part is it's the middle. As far as like where the climax should be and where the best part should be, it should be like over here in the back third. And I don't think anything in the back third touches as good as this part was here. This just hit so hard and was such a great twist and was so engaging. And I just don't think that Leigh Bardugo continued to build with it or do anything that ever hit the high of this moment right here. So let's go ahead and talk about Rabbitty Babbitty and other exposition backstory elements. Guys, what even the hell was Rabbitty Babbitty? So if you look at the Ninth House cover and you look at the Hellbent cover, in Ninth House, the only thing you can see there is the snake, and that snake is Alex. And we slowly get this comparison between Alex and a viper, and Alex finally owning her identity as the viper and like fighting and destroying everything around her. And it's excellent because everything around her is just terrible, and we want her like to stop holding back, stop playing this innocent, kind, and cooperative girl, and start being tough and kicking ass and taking names. So it's such a great moment. Everything about that culmination is great. So Hellbent, you've got the rabbit, and you're like, what the heck could the rabbit have to do with pulling Darlington out of hell? We get this moment in Alex's backstory where we find out that she and Helly had bought a pet rabbit called Rabbitty Babbitty or Babbitty Rabbitty. I don't know, it doesn't matter. And they loved it and it was fluffy and whatever. Bad things happened to the rabbit and it sort of like breaks Alex, both in her past and again when she's reliving it. Story was unnecessary and it's really cruel and upsetting and it felt like emotional manipulation. And I think these are like sort of supposed to be two sides of Alex's persona, like who Alex is now, like this mean viper. Like she also has this softer, caring, like team building side that she needs to protect. That's like why she turned into the viper or whatever. It's like this brutal murder of the rabbit that we're experiencing here that like did this to her when I didn't need any explanation as to why Alex was the viper. We had gotten more than enough like terror and trauma and horrific things to explain that already. I just don't understand what Rabbitty Babbitty or Babbitty Rabbitty was supposed to be adding. Was that supposed to make us like Helly less because of how Helly dealt with the loss of this rabbit, or like allowed it to happen? It's a confusing part of this story that again I think is there to manipulate readers more than it is to like tell a good story or mean anything. The Wheelwalker stuff really doesn't pay off in this book either. It was probably too much to hope for that we would have been able to tie the Wheelwalker stuff in either to Alex's grandmother or into Alex's dad. In fact, ever getting more about Alex's dad seems like some kind of fairy dream that I made up in the first book. But it feels like the Wheelwalker in this book was just like convenient. Like, need a quick way to get into hell that doesn't involve a ritual? Random Wheelwalker power. We're never going to be able to do it again. We're never going to explain it. It's just because you're a Wheelwalker and it worked out because you were stressed. Need a way to shake down people for money? Be a wheel walker and pull in grays. Need to talk to someone about something and no one else find out about it? Be a wheel walker and talk to ghosts because nobody else can communicate with them. Like, Alex often worries about the danger of interacting with Greys or the danger of them finding out that she can hear them, but that never pays off. And Alex worries about what would happen if other people found out how much she could do with her wheel walker abilities, but that also doesn't pay off. So it's kind of like angst over here and nothing but reward and plot convenience. And then lastly, like the second descent into hell was pretty anticlimactic for me. I was invested in returning the demons to hell, but like them doing the whole clockwise circle again around the library and then without like the big reveal of different murders just wasn't that interesting to me. You know, like the thing that was cool about that first scene was reliving the murders and then being in hell and it being like an unknown mystery. But there's no murder reveal now, and there's no unknown mystery in hell. We pretty much know what we're walking into. And Alex had more or less telegraphed to readers what her plan was. So I wasn't like concerned about Darlington or Alex or any of our characters dying or being stuck in hell. Yeah, so I felt like that back third was kind of a slog. There's some reward reading through it because eventually you find out what happened to Trip, and Trip is an interesting character. The thing that should have been the climax of the book was not interesting and felt like filler. I really wish that Alex and the team had to find a different way into hell. So yeah, that's all of my off-the-cuff feelings about Hellbent and why it's a 4-star read. You probably got the idea from this breakdown that it's closer to a 3-star read, and really that's the thing about reflecting on a book like Hellbent for me. It's deeply immersive and engaging when you're reading it. It's very exciting. Lee Bardugo has this writing style that kind of like sweeps you away and just makes you want to be part of the story. But when you're done, it kind of leaves you like empty. So if we're talking about how I felt when I was reading the book, it's 5 stars. And if we're talking about how I feel when I think about the book, it's 3, which is why we're sitting here at a solid 4. But what about you guys? Did you read Hellbent and what did you think of it? Tell me in those comments down below. And if you got this far into the story, go ahead and leave me either a snake or a rabbit emoji. Thanks for watching, and as always, keep reading. Bye!